If you are the managing director of a Cyprus Limited or are planning to set up a Cyprus Limited, then you should definitely watch the following video until the end, because I will now tell you how high you should ideally set your managing director's salary for the year 2025. So make sure to stay tuned. Hello and welcome. My name is Florian Wilk. I am the Managing Director of CMC in Larnaca, Cyprus, and we help entrepreneurs relocate to Cyprus. We are also happy to take care of all tax and legal matters, from company formation, accounting, annual financial statements, and more. Truly from A to Z, and we are very, very happy to support you with your plans. And of course, a very, very important and frequently asked question when dealing with company formation in Cyprus, specifically the formation of a so-called limited, which is essentially a Cypriot LLC, is what should I set as my managing director's salary? And of course, as you know from Germany or Austria, people tend to want to set a higher salary. But in Cyprus, things are a bit different. And that's a very, very important point for a basic understanding of the Cypriot tax system. Salaries, in other words, income, are taxed relatively highly. You have an income tax exemption threshold, which is set at 19,500 euros per year. Then it starts with 20% income tax, and then progressively 25%, 30%, and 35% income tax from 60,000 onwards. So there are several brackets up to 35% income tax. There are also what I like to call income tax discounts, 50% income tax reduction, under certain conditions, but I don't want to go into that any further now. That's a different topic. Nevertheless, you are always better off tax-wise if you are taxed within the limited, that is within the company, with a flat tax rate of 12.5%. In practice, it's often even a bit lower, and then you pay out to yourself as a so-called non. So you should definitely apply for this status if you want to become a tax resident in Cyprus. So if you emigrate to Cyprus, it obviously makes sense to apply for this non-dom status. This means, as mentioned, 12.5% at the limited company level, and on distributions, instead of 17% capital gains tax or defense contribution, as it's called in Cyprus, you pay 0% and you pay a health contribution. That's really just symbolic, I'd say, but I don't want to overlook it, namely 2.65%, which is also capped at 180,000 euros of income per year. So the maximum health contribution is 4,770 euros. 12.5% at the limited company level, and 2.65% health contribution on the profit distributions to you as a shareholder. That means, conversely, I don't need a high salary. And of course, what you often hear from clients is that they say, well, then I'll just set my salary at 1,500 euros or something like that, pay myself 12 or 13 monthly salaries, and then make use of the tax-free allowance of 19,500. Yes, that's one way to do it. You can do that. But of course, you also pay social security contributions from the very first euro. And that's still between 22 and 28%. Let's say on average 25%. There are a few variables there. And of course, those are also costs. Now, of course, you could say, yes, I also receive benefits for that. Maybe unemployment benefits if I dismiss myself from my GmbH, or I get a pension entitlement. That's certainly true. Nevertheless, in my opinion, it's always better to make private provisions for such things yourself. There are all sorts of options and products for that. I don't need to go into detail now, instead of relying on the state and paying into those systems as much as possible. Of course, we know that I think throughout Europe and in many countries around the world, these systems are in some cases on the verge of collapse. So maybe you shouldn't rely too much on a state pension or things like that, especially if you're still very young. It's better then to make private provisions. So in other words, I want to keep the salary as low as possible. The minimum wage in Cyprus is 950 euros per month. That's a good benchmark. You can pay yourself the minimum wage, 950 euros, which means a manageable amount for social security contributions, and at least as far as the salary is concerned, you are still exempt from income tax. That's already very, very, very cost effective. That's already a very good optimization. What you can even do to take it a step further, if you want to optimize further, you can just as well go down to a salary of 500 euros. This is generally accepted by the authorities. It's always a case-by-case consideration. Every case really has to be looked at individually. It's always an individual agreement with the authorities, but as a rule, a salary of 500 euros is actually accepted. Of course, you can't live on 500 euros. That means as a new limited company, you should, if necessary, regularly pay out distributions to yourself in advance. That means you can occasionally pay yourself 5, 10, 50, or even 100,000 euros in advance, depending on your liquidity needs. This is basically possible even during the year, and you can use it to cover your living expenses. So you're not dependent on this salary. So my tip is, start low without worry. You can always increase your salary later. With a salary of 500 euros, you have about 150 euros in social security costs. That's what I wanted to say. And these 150 euros are, of course, very, very symbolic. And I think anyone can afford that in any case. Even someone who is just starting out with their business, or rather as a freelancer, but has everything under the limited structure simply to optimize taxes, maybe even only in the future. I think anyone can afford these 150 euros, and you really don't mind paying them. What's important is that you contribute to the social security system, and then, of course, you can always say later on, I'll increase the amount. Some people also don't feel comfortable and say, 500 euros is just too little for me, it doesn't feel right. I want to receive a higher salary. I want to pay myself at least 1,000 or 1,500 euros, and that's absolutely fine. I just want to help you optimize and save on taxes as well as social security contributions. But of course, these are always just options. And at the end of the day, it's your decision and your personal preference. What we also see sometimes is that someone says, I want to finance a property. And in most cases, the bank wants to see 6 payslips, meaning from the last 6 months. And of course, when planning this property financing, you can also increase your salary. Maybe the bank says, well, you need a net income of 3,000 or 4,000 euros, and accordingly, we have to significantly increase the gross salary. Of course, this means you have to pay income tax and social security contributions. Yes, but sometimes that can be a necessary evil in order to make the bank happy, so to speak. So there are definitely cases where it makes sense to set a higher salary. Sometimes, especially with certain tax structures, it actually makes sense to go higher. But in most cases, this symbolic salary is really sufficient. And by the way, that's also the first thing we always do when we take on clients for ongoing accounting and consulting. Because as a rule, the salary is simply set very high or comparatively high. Sometimes clients have salaries of 2, 3, or even 5,000 euros per month. I suspect it's simply because there was no advice given, or let's say certain habits from Germany or Austria were adopted, or to put it another way, only minor optimizations were made, like saying, well, instead of 10,000, let's make it a 5,000 euro managing director's salary or something like that. Because that's a saving too, of course. But as I said, there really is no reason, or to put it differently, rarely a reason. There are reasons, of course, but as a rule, there's usually no reason to draw a rather high salary. So as I said, just start low. You can always adjust and change it later. You're completely free in this regard, and of course, you can be absolutely flexible with your own company. If you have questions about this topic or about tax matters in the Republic of Cyprus in general, maybe you're planning to move to Cyprus, or you already have a company in Cyprus but aren't satisfied with your current tax advisor, then you're very, very welcome to get in touch with me. My team and I are very happy to support you with your plans and your tax structuring in Cyprus. And we have the opportunity to have a free and truly completely non-binding consultation. You'll find a link below the video where you can schedule an appointment, and then I can already give you some initial tips and advice. And maybe we'll end up working together and we'll be able to support your tax structure in Cyprus or your relocation. So I hope I was able to help you a bit. A few important pieces of information, some good input for optimizing your managing director's salary in Cyprus. I also look forward to your comments. I answer every single comment. And of course, I'd also appreciate it if you give the video a like, if you enjoyed it even a little. And if you subscribe to my channel. So thank you very much. I wish you all the best and much success with your plans in Cyprus.